Welcome to Explore. I'm Mary Ruth Snyder. I'm the Executive Director for the Campbell River and District Chamber of Commerce and the host of Explore, being filmed here today at the Shaw Spotlight Studio on Rob Ron Road. It's so nice to be back in the studio. Our very special guest today is Sandra Parrish, who is the Executive Director of the museum at Campbell River. Welcome and thank you so much for coming today.
Well, thanks for having me, Mary Ruth. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, Sandra, the last 2 years at the museum, they must have been quite challenging, as with every other public institution in Canada, due to the pandemic. How did you manage those challenges, and what were they for you and the staff and the volunteers?
Well, yes, it was very challenging, like any other organization. I think that how we managed the challenge was just through the resilience of the staff and the volunteers, and then thankfully some good emergency governmental support kind of saw us through. But it was really a time to look at some other projects that had been on the back burner, to come up with some new projects, and all those sorts of things. But certainly challenging to sort of think, okay, we can do things this way, and then a health regulation would change and it would be, okay, no, we're gonna have to go this way instead of that way. Also, you know, the building was just quiet, and that, like the building on a regular day, there's school kids in it, there's tourists in the summer, and you just feel all that energy. And it wasn't like that. So that was, you know, from a personal point of view, that was a little bit hard to keep your attitude positive during that.
Now, how many staff are there at the museum?
So given, including our part-time staff, in the summer there's about 15 staff, because we have 3 summer students as well.
Oh, great. And then how big of a volunteer army have you got working?
So there's about 40 to 60 volunteers.
Wow.
The ones that work most frequently are those that work with school groups.
Okay. Now that things have started to open up again, what is it that you're most excited about?
I'm just really excited to have people back in the building and to feel that energy. I'm excited for some of the projects that we worked on during the shutdown periods and how those are unfolding.
Okay. Now, Sandra, where did you yourself begin your life's journey? Where did life begin for you?
Well, actually, I was born in Scotland. And my family immigrated here when I was a young child to the North Island, to Port Alice.
Oh, wow.
And then eventually made their way to Campbell River.
Okay. So did you do some of your elementary schooling in Port Alice?
Yes, my first years in school were in Port Alice.
And then how old were you when you made it down to Campbell River?
I was going into grade 4.
Oh, okay. Now, do you have memories of Port Alice?
Yes.
Do you? And what was your favorite memory of Port Alice?
I think it was the community, because it was a new community with a lot of immigrants, like my family, and some First Nations. So it was the community feeling, and feeling that neighbors looked out for you, sort of thing.
Which part of Scotland did you come from?
We came from just outside of Glasgow, a place called Tullibuddy. Yes.
Oh, that's a fun name. Do you still have family there?
We do, but we've lost connections with them. It was not, neither side were a very large family.
Oh, okay. Now, when you moved from Port Alice into the big city of Campbell River, what was that transition like for you as a grade 4 student?
Well, in between we were in Burnaby.
Oh,
so
okay.
we were in a bigger
Oh, okay.
spot, and then Campbell River.
Oh, okay. And how long were you in Burnaby?
I think it's just a couple of years.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
All right. So when you arrived in Campbell River, how long did it take you to realize that this was going to be sort of your forever place?
Well, fairly early on, because it was the first home that my parents had owned. You know, people didn't necessarily have the means to buy their own home, and this was it. So we knew we were going to be putting roots down here for a long time.
Now, which high school did you go to?
I went to Carey High.
Okay.
Yes.
Two of our volunteers today are from
Yes.
Carey High.
Yeah.
Now, and after Carey High, what did you do for your post-secondary? Or did you go on a gap year before you went on?
Actually, I went into early childhood education.
Oh, okay.
Is what I thought I wanted to do as a career path,
Yeah.
and diverted from that to the museum.
Oh, okay. So, how long after you finished your schooling did you end up at the museum?
Very shortly thereafter, when I finished my schooling, it was a period of not good economic times, and there weren't a lot of jobs. And the museum in those days had a lot of employment grants, and I applied for one of those and have been there ever since, and continued on with some education and while on the job.
Okay. So how many years have you actually been at the museum now?
Since about 1985.
Okay, so 30...
Not continuously, but yes.
Yeah, so about 37 years.
Yes, yeah.
Wow, that's a
lifetime.
That's a career.
It is, yes.
Now, in your time in the early days of the museum, was there anything from your childhood or your upbringing that informed what the path you were taking once you got into the museum?
Well, I was thinking a bit about that, and my parents, they always liked to take us to museums, and were very interested, like all immigrants, in this new place they were going to call home. What was the surrounding environment like? What were the people like? So I think that's what really formed my interest in the museum.
Now, at what point, what was your first job at the museum?
Clerk typist.
Oh. All right.
And I couldn't type very well.
So you learned how to type.
Yes.
And then what was the next position you moved into?
After that, it was the early days of computerizing.
Oh,
and
okay.
My next role was working towards computerizing the artifact records.
Oh, okay. And now has everything been digitized at this point?
No. That's more than a lifelong.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
All right.
yeah.
Now, after you finished that, like, at what point did you move? Like, what was your ladder steps?
The person that I worked with, who supervised me, was Irene Ross, and she was the archivist registrar.
Oh, okay.
And at that point, they knew she was going to be retiring within a couple of years, and the leadership of the day came to me and said, was I interested in continuing and working there? And I was young, and I thought, well, I better say yes. So I said yes, and I went on from there. So then there was some courses and training and things like that they were able to apply for funding for.
And once you really dug into what you were learning and transitioning into this lifelong career in a museum, at what point did you realize that it was really turning out to be your passion?
I think it would be definitely by the time I was in my 30s, sort of.
And which role were you in at that point?
At that point, we would be working towards moving into the new facility.
Oh, okay.
Because of course the museum was where the art gallery is today.
Yeah.
Originally.
And your role, you were in the archivist role at that point?
It had evolved to being the collections manager.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Now, and then when you moved into the new building, who was the executive director at that point in the new building?
So when we moved into the new building, our longtime executive director, who had really been the driving force around getting the new building, resigned. So there was a period where there was recruitment and so on, and then later on, Alicia Davis was hired as the executive director, and she sort of finished the projects that needed to be done.
And then at what point did you transition into that role?
I've been the executive director since about 2015. And prior to that, the collections manager position also took on the exhibit installation. So I oversaw the installation of all the permanent exhibits of the museum.
Awesome. That must have been so interesting.
Very.
To try to pull all those pieces from the various eras of our history and put them in a display arrangement that would make sense to the general population.
Yes, yeah.
What did you learn during that time that you didn't know?
Well, there was so many things. It would be hard to sort of single one thing out. In every space and every gallery, there was something to learn. I think, though, the one gallery where I learned the most actually was the colonization gallery, because that was my first real exposure to residential school experiences, and how the land had been colonized, and the rights of First Nations people.
Right. Now, here we are in 2022, and there is a tremendous focus, and rightfully so, on decolonization and reconciliation. And what role do you see the museum playing in that conversation?
Well, I think the museum has a very important role to play in that conversation, and I think that that is one thing about the museum at Campbell River, is that each successive staff have known that there is a role. How we approach that role has changed and grown and evolved. We really see the museum as a community gathering space, a place where we can come together and we can learn, and we can be a place where we can provide an opportunity for people to share their stories and have their voice. And I think that's the role that museums have, is being that place of learning, acceptance, and letting other voices be heard.
And there is, especially over the last 2 or 3 years, there has been almost an international movement to ensure that cultural items are returned to their home nations. And how did that, in your work over the last 4 or 5 years, in those conversations with other museum executives across Canada and around the globe, how did that sort of finally come to the forefront?
Well, I think that what really brought it has been a part of the discussion for many, many years. But I think that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is really what brought it to the forefront. And then a lot of the larger institutions which have very different collections than the kinds of collections we have here in Campbell River, really had to do the work to make sure they had repatriation procedures, policy, and ways of working.
Okay. And have you found, in talking with your staff, would you say that there is now a sense of hope for moving forward?
Oh, I think there is a sense of hope, and I think that is the thing that is very unique about the museum here and this community, is that has really been, maybe not done the right way, But that's always been part of the dialogue. There is a way to move forward.
And where are you today in that journey of conversation and reconciliation?
Well, I think the best example of that is the temporary exhibit that we opened in March, called Cecil Dawson Standing in the Gap. And it's one of those, we had a lot more time to spend working on that because of the pandemic. And so our curator, Beth Boyce, worked quite extensively with Cecil Dawson, who's a hereditary chief and an artist, to develop an exhibit that provided an opportunity for him, in his own voice, to share his story and his family's story and look at how those generations have been impacted by colonization. So I think that's a good example of.
Now, how long is that exhibit on for?
That exhibit will be in the gallery until the end of October.
Okay.
So there's lots of opportunity for people to come and view it. And Cecil, during the time, will be back and forth doing some special programming and things like that.
So will there be public gatherings where he's going to be make presentations?
Yes.
And conversation. Okay.
Yes.
Wonderful. Now, this one's staying up longer than you typically would have. Okay. And what do you have coming in following that?
So, of course, after that, we go to our Festival of Trees, which is our fundraising event. And then, to be perfectly frank, the pandemic did completely destroy our temporary exhibit schedule. So we're looking at what's coming in for next year and the year after. We're a little bit behind the ball on that, but.
Now, in working with Cecil on creating this exhibit that demonstrates the multi-generational impacts that he and his family have felt, which, what is it in your conversations with him, what stood out and what surprised you, if anything?
I think it didn't surprise me because I've experienced this in other situations, but what stood out is just the realization of that intergenerational impact. It's not just him or his parents, his and how complex it is. It's not a one fix solution.
Right. Now, and with Cecil, does he have children and?
Yes, he does.
Grandchildren and.
Yes.
So, was there any conversation about what he sees now as opportunities or the evolution of this towards a healing process for his next generations?
Well, he views the whole thing as that.
Okay.
It was just when health regulations were being lifted, we had a private opening that we live streamed and is available on our YouTube channel. We are continually talking about, even after the exhibit is gone, how we can continue the message and the impact that it has.
Right.
So this he sees as a way of doing that.
And that would be a way forward for everyone.
Exactly.
To come to an understanding, because I think the discovery of the children's graves a year ago really helped everybody sit up and go,
yes.
I'm sorry, what?
Yes.
Where there were people like yourself that were immersed in engaging with First Nations long before that, so you probably were aware of some of that. But I think for the general population and the public, they just weren't, because it wasn't something the government was sharing.
No.
Even though the First Nations were sharing it, the government wasn't, so nobody was really listening.
Yeah. Well, I think it was easy, and I've heard many, many people over the years say this. Well, my grandfather went to a boarding school and it was pretty tough there. It was easy to kind of equate that experience,
right,
and not really realize, well, but your parents weren't forced to send you, but
right,
that was the pattern of thinking.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But absolutely, the discovery of the unmarked graves kind of shook that pattern of thinking and made everyone sort of step back and think about it,
right,
in a different light.
You are watching Explore. We are coming to you from the Rob Rowan Road Shaw Spotlight Studio. Our guest today is Sandra Parrish, the Executive Director for the Museum at Campbell River. Now, Sandra, as you look forward into the fall and school groups coming back, so if you could share with us some of the upcoming summer programs you have for everyone, and then what's coming up in the fall.
Absolutely. So our historic boat tours are up and running, and that's great to have those up. We also have something new this year. We've got kids camps.
Great.
For young children. And then, of course, our puppet theater is back live, not having to be virtual or any other variation. Yeah. So lots happening in the summer. We're also working on the launch of a kids book that the museum is part of, and there'll be a summer event around that. And then in the fall, the Fall Festival at Haig Brown House, the annual Haig Brown Memorial Lecture. Haven't quite decided about Halloween yet. And then, of course, Festival of Trees.
Now, will there be another writer-in-residence coming up in the fall?
Writer-in-residence has been selected, but we haven't
really announce it?
We haven't announced the name formally yet, but she has accepted, and we're really looking forward to that. Okay. So that program will be back and running as usual.
So when does the writer-in-residence arrive in Campbell River
Around
at the Haig Browns?
About November 15th, usually mid-November.
Stays until?
April 15th.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Awesome. So we can expect some workshops from her?
So there'll be some workshops, and of course those one-on-one consultations that everyone enjoys so much. Then depending on the schools, the last writer-in-residence, Danny Rabbidan, did a lot of school presentations, and we'll see what happens there.
Now, looking ahead to the fall, are you expecting an explosion of school programs to make up for the last couple of years? Just the interest from the students?
That's already happened. Those teachers came back almost as soon as they could. Okay. So yes, we're expecting that to grow even more. But our challenge is going to be around the volunteers, because some of the volunteers who work with the school groups, who are essential to our delivery, are still a little bit uncomfortable, for various health reasons. So that's going to be our challenge. So
share with us the volunteer role and how people can get in touch with you to volunteer if they're interested after seeing this program.
Absolutely. So that's one of the many ways you can volunteer at the museum. So if you work as a docent, you work to give the tours essentially to the children. There's usually a hands-on activity that's a part of each program. So it's a great opportunity for someone who's maybe a retired educator or has worked in the childcare field or just interested in teaching children. The best way to get in touch is just to stop by the museum or email us at our general inquiries.
Okay, and I'm sure there'll be a graphic that they put up with all of that information, phone number and email and website.
Yes.
I think, and you're not alone in the need for volunteers. This has been conversations that we've been having right across Canada. The pandemic really shifted what volunteers were doing and how often they were volunteering. And many of them have stepped away from those volunteer roles. So I think most organizations are looking towards the younger generations to sort of start giving back a little bit, like the 40 and 50 somethings, to kind of get them involved in Rotary clubs and Lions and museums and the volunteer center, and just to really get back and get involved in the community, because I know that you're right, a lot of seniors that were very active before have really chosen
well,
to
and it was
back.
2 years, and when you're reaching that point in your life, that can be significant.
All right. Well, if you have any interest in volunteering, there isn't a better place in Campbell River to do it than the museum at Campbell River. It's always so interesting with the school programs and the public programs and the tourists coming in from literally all over the world in conversations with Destination Campbell River. Even last year, in a pandemic year, they had over 6,000 people come through their doors. So this year we are expecting an explosion of visitors. All the hotels are already booked all the way through till the end of September. People are moving around, and I'm sure that the museum is going to be at the top of their list to stop, because it is a world-class facility, and congratulations on all of the evolutions that you've overseen through your own career at the museum, and where you've brought the staff to now, because it is just an exceptional place.
Well, thank you. Thank you. But it takes the community, and this is an exceptional community, and the support has been very valuable to the museum and appreciated.
Well said, well said. Sandra, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time and your insights.
You're welcome.
You have been watching Explore here from the Rob Ron studio of Shaw Spotlight. I'm Mary Ruth Snyder. We will see you again.